Welcome back. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'm going to be with you at 3 o'clock. We have been covering this Florida versus Scott Nelson case. This is a death penalty case, horrific, brutal murder. That's going to be coming back at 1:30. They're on lunch break right now. But guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about Texas versus Wesley Mathews. Now, this is what they call in Texas the slow plea, where he's pled guilty to a lesser offense of injury to a child by omission. He had originally been charged with capital murder, tampering with evidence. And what essentially is going to happen, we'll get into the law on that in a minute, is there's a picture of him right there, is that the jury's now going to be deciding the penalty phase of this. And this involves a victim, Sharon Mathews, who was 3 years old and was the adopted daughter. There's a picture of that beautiful angel right there. Originally, the defendant told the police that she had disappeared on October 7, 17 after she was left outside as punishment for not drinking milk, but then later changed the story and told the police that she died by choking while he, quote, physically assisted her, end quote, with drinking her milk. He admits that he hid the body, but says he was going to go back later in order to give her a proper burial. The medical examiner calling this a homicidal violent offense, and the Child Protective Services have removed the couple's biological daughter. So this couple also had a biological daughter, and they noted in this, which I thought was a very interesting set of facts, that in the house there were no pics of the adopted daughter, but the house was filled with lots of pictures with the biological daughter. And they also list many allegations of a previous pattern of abuse and neglect by both parents. Joseph Scott Morgan has been actually following this case from its inception and knows a lot about the facts of this quote-unquote mom and dad. Joseph, what's jumping out at you is most fascinating about this? And if you could, tell us a little bit about what this slow plea means and if you thought it was a good idea for them to enter into this.
Unfortunately, I can't address slow plea quite as well as you could, Bob, but I have to tell you, I don't really recall in recent memory a case that has made my blood boil from a coverage standpoint as much as this one had. I was involved from the beginning on air trying to find her. We would put out in some of the broadcasts that I would do on other networks, we would put out missing notices about her. A lot of us were tweeting about this, hoping against hope that she was going to be found, because in the beginning, it was stated that this little girl was placed outside as punishment for not drinking her milk. She was forced to drink milk at about 3 a.m. by her adoptive parents. And the reason they were doing this is that she had some developmental issues. She was, behind the curve. They had adopted her from India. And they were all about, just trying to take care of this little precious darling. And as it turned out, she never turned up. And there was a fear because, and this is kind of, the chilling part at this point, there was a fear. There had been rumors that there were coyotes in this area. And this girl's very diminutive. And people were afraid. They kept talking about, well, coyotes have taken her off and this sort of thing. And as it turned out, her body was later recovered about 2 weeks later, stuffed down into a culvert not too far away from their home. And so we knew at that point in time that there was much more to this story. And of course, the adoptive parents were, according to the authorities, directly linked to her death. The problem is that her cause of death was listed as essentially homicidal violence. They weren't able to conclude. But keep in mind, as you well know, Bob, with these kinds of cases, she's so diminutive, she's so fragile that the least little thing with her could have killed her, something as passive as suffocation. It wouldn't necessarily take a beating or a choking where the neck is broken. And so Lord only knows, but that's what they're moving forward with.
Yeah, Gene, the slow plea to a lesser injury by omission, apparently, as I'm understanding this is an agreement that's entered into, and so the jury can now make the decision. He's pled guilty to the lesser offense of injury to a child by omission, and our great producers pulled up for us the law, Texas Criminal Code 22.04. Listen to this law. if a person intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or with criminal negligence, or knowingly, intentionally, recklessly, or negligently by omission causes a child 1, serious bodily injury, 2, serious mental deficiency, impairment, or injury, or 3, bodily injury to a child under the age of 14, then they're guilty. And the interesting thing about that, Gene, is that the penalty ranges, depending on whether it was intentional or whether it was knowing versus whether it was reckless or criminal, range everywhere from a life sentence in the first degree to a second degree. So there's a real large swath there that the jury's going to have a huge range with which to sentence this defendant. What do you think about that law?
I think it's a good law because let the jury pick the sentence in a case like this. And Joe, I share your thoughts about how horrific this is. He got a good deal, actually, and I'm not surprised if he gets life. Just like Scandarito, the other case involving a guy who decapitated his father, he got acquitted of murder, but he got the maximum from the judge on the crime of the way he handled the corpse of his father. So I don't have any problem with this law. And if he gets 30, 40 years, he should consider it a gift.
Right. So essentially, by doing this slow plea, he was able to take it out of the death penalty. And I would imagine that based upon, from what I remember of the case, Joseph, there was some interesting permutations about how she died, the manner in which she died. You may have a problem with regard to some of the medical, evidence in the case as to, cause and manner of death. And if it may not be the kind of case that prosecutors felt completely comfortable that they would get a death sentence on. So they bargained for the idea, well, let the jury call it, and hopefully the call for basically the rest of his life in prison. So everyone stands to gain because they've eliminated the worst case possibilities, including a not guilty in a case.
Yeah, you're talking about non-specific homicidal violence, and I've covered this kind of case in the past, not this specific kind, but cases where it's indeterminate, but they have enough there to know that they brought about the death. Let me argue it from the defense's side now. We're not talking about some other state here. We're talking about Texas, and I got to tell you, taking the temperature like I did early on in this case, people, their blood was up, as they say down in the South. Relative to this, they wanted blood over this case because of this darling little angel. Texas is not shy about using the death penalty, and I would imagine that there is some sharp defense attorney that's telling this guy, listen, they're offering this. My advice to you is to take it and run and thank God the rest of your days on this earth, because you could be looking at the needle.
Right, and Gene, that gets right back to the point that I was saying before, that keep him alive for another minute, another hour, another day. So as far as a capital murder litigator is concerned for the defense, it was a success that it was taken out of the death penalty. And to Joseph's point, I hear that there's a pretty significant record of previous instances of abuse with this child, which is, Joseph said, I don't think you need to be from Texas to necessarily get really angered and agitated as an aggravating factor in a death penalty case, because this child, if by all appearances was not loved, maybe because of her developmental disabilities, maybe because she wasn't the biological child of the father, and the other child was well cared for, and well, all those pictures were in the house. I mean, that could be brutal evidence against the defense.
Pediatrician that testified, or that they spoke with, and there's one image that's going to pop up. I want you guys to take a close look at it. I think she's in a yellow dress. Look at her left elbow there. There's a contused area right there, and they talked about she had multiple broken bones over a period of time. There were other injuries that she had sustained, and the story was that the biological child had pushed that child off of a sofa and had generated these injuries, which, it takes some kind of fall from a significant height to accomplish that task. And I don't know that they really looked into this. Again, we're back to DPS here. Really, I don't know if they truly looked into this case like they should have. It's very, very tragic because we see in this particular case how there were warning signs on the horizon, and now we've got a child who has lost her life, and I think that that's very significant here.
Real quick, I mean, that evidence of previous abuse would be damning to the defense, but also I want to ask you, Gene, in your career, in your history, and it's just a feeling I have. I don't want to, point the finger at everybody because it's not always like this, but it always seems to me that there are cases where Child Protective Services comes in sometimes on some very minimal thing and draconian actions. The kids are taken out and what have you, and yet there are other cases, I know we've had them in Jersey, where there have been horrific instances of a multitude of contacts and really, really bad, and the kids weren't removed. It's so arbitrary to me. What are your experiences with that?
Well, what it tells me about any organization, public or private, is that, I'm Catholic. Only the Pope is infallible. An entity, Child Protective Services, or even the U.S. Attorney's Office or a prosecutor's office, we are not perfect, and things always fall through the cracks, good or bad, and you can't prevent that.
Educating me on various areas of literature and food and culture, and I want you to know that the Pope is not always infallible. They're only infallible when they sit ex cathedra in the chair of Peter and speak on an issue of faith and morals and say, I am speaking infallibly now, and it's not done often. Did you know that, Gene?
I did know that.
Well, okay, I'm just saying, we want to give our readers a whole understanding of all sorts of things, both legal, both faith-based, and a lot of humor. All right, guys, listen, there's a great opportunity right now to take a quick break, do some business here at the Law&Crime Network, and we'll be back with some more of this fascinating trial analysis.